darkness in the Western Kingdoms, the necromancer Zayl journeys to Westmarch to restore the balance. Amid his quest, he crossed paths with Lady Selene Nesardo.
Last hired to an ancient house who seeks a necromancer to help convene with her late husband.
But they summon Lord Nesardo's spirit in the moldering crypts beneath the family estate. Zayl and Salene stumble upon something unexpected.
On everything, plot to unleash the demon Astrogah and his minions on Sanctuary.
Salene and Zayl become entangled in a web of alliances and intrigues that embroil both the nobility and Selene's bloodline.
Allies work to prepare a horrific ritual to ensure his coming.
To his return, the moon of the spire is at the heart of the mounting evil in Westmarch. Wields Two. The inn of the Black Ram was a flat-roofed stone building in the lower end of Westmarch, the city that saw its fair share of the suspicious and the unsavory. Paradoxically, that meant that the establishment also saw its fair share of the powerful and wealthy, both those who sought the dank environment to close questionable deals, and those who simply desired a thrill. There was some of each this particular evening, the various types seated at their booths and tables and murmuring over tankards of throat-scorching ale and half-burnt mutton. But whatever the reason for choosing the Black Ram this foggy eve, all without the exception found themselves turning for no reason that they understood towards creaking door just as the great bells of the city struck the late hour. He was pale of skin and had a narrow face better suited for a studious clerk than a mysterious figure shrouded in dark cloak and robes. His eyes were the most arresting feature, for they were distinctly curved and of a startling gray. From out under the hood of his cloak, a few strands of flat, black hair hung over his forehead. The stranger was of slim build, but in the way that acrobats were. The newcomer's high leather boots made no sound on the aged planks as he strode toward an open booth. His cloak billowed as he walked, and in the flickering light of the boxy brass oil lamps above, tiny silver symbols sewn into the trim of the garment glittered, disappeared, then glittered to life again. One corner opposite from the new figure, a young woman whose graceful beauty stood out like a beacon in the neighborhood of the Black Ram watched him most intently. With her sat two men, one a giant with the clear look of a bodyguard, and the other roughly her age, with enough similarity of features to be easily identified as related to the woman. He scowled in the stranger's direction, clearly repulsed by what he saw. The plump, blonde serving woman, who should have seen to the hooded figure's needs, refused to step from behind the waist-high wooden counter where the ales were poured from the barrels. The proprietor, a balding stout man of middle years, tugged on his lower lip, then wiped his hands and proceeded out himself. Under a heavy brow, he eyed his newest patron with far more respect than he generally gave to all but the most highborn. "Greetings, Master Hiram, I am, Master of the Black Ram. 'Tis an unusual honor it is to have one of yours here. Unusual, but not unheard of. Been one or two over the years." The seated figure nodded once. His voice was smooth, calm. "Yes, I would not imagine many have come to Westmarch. What can I bring you?" "The stew I smell will do. I would ask for water, but here I suspect it'd be healthier to drink the ale." Hiram grunted. "Aye. Then that is all, unless you have a room for the night." The innkeeper swallowed. "Just one night?" "Yes." Sensing Hiram's hesitation, the figure reached a gloved hand to one of the pouches at his waist. As he brought it up, it clinked with the song of good coins. Much of the innkeeper's trepidation vanished. "Aye, for one night we can help you, Master Zayl. Just Zayl." Left alone again, Zayl surreptitiously surveyed the room. He had never been this far from home, and, despite his demeanor, was uneasy. It had not been his intention to leave the jungle's catch stand for the Western Kingdoms, but he had been drawn here by forces far stronger than himself. Would that I could be like them. he thought, blithely ignorant of the troubles converging on us all. His journey had taken him to the kingdom of Westmarch and the capital city of the same name. Cautious questioning of locals, cautious because one of his calling ever risked the notice of the authorities, had garnered Zayl only hearsay, enough to keep him enticed, but not enough to explain to him why he had felt driven to come to this particular region. He noted the woman across the room still eyeing him whenever she thought him unaware. From the glances and murmurs that passed between her and the smaller male, a sibling, Zayl suspected, they knew him for what he was. Follower of Rathma, a devotee to maintaining of the balance, a delver into the world of the dead. Many shunned necromancers, not without good reason sometimes, but those like Zayl who had given themselves over to the teachings of Rathma meant people no harm. Zayel's kind fought against the darkness, against the primevals, for victory by the forces of hell would forever send the balance completely awry. The Rathmanians' methods might not always meet with the approval of the uninitiated masses, but the results were what counted. One terrible defeat could mean the end of all. Each necromancer was taught to follow the course of the ongoing struggle on his own, choosing his path on the basis of where his senses dictated he had to go. It had come as a great shock to Zayl when he felt himself compelled to journey west across the Twin Seas. But he had not shirked from his duty. The balance was in too precarious a state to turn a blind eye from what needed to be done. After all, the World Stone had been destroyed. His dark reverie was interrupted by the return of Hiram with his meal. The stew, a greenish-brown mass with bits of old vegetables and stringy meat in it, had a tolerable odor and taste, and the ale looked fresh enough. Having expected worse, Zayl nodded his approval. He was nearly hungry enough to devour the table, though he would have never visibly revealed such weakness even to himself. Rathmanians learned to fast for extended periods of time in order to purge their bodies of impurities, but Zayl had gone longer than normal. Even this questionable fare would go far in restoring him to his full faculties. Paying the proprietor, the necromancer took off his left glove, picked up the iron spoon resting in the bowl, and began to eat. The right hand remained covered, even despite the growing warmth of the room. As he reached for his drink, a muffled sound emanated from the large pouch. Zayel's gloved hand immediately slipped to the pouch, slapping it once. The sound cut off. Out of the corner of his eye, he looked to see if anyone had noticed. Only the woman appeared to have noticed anything unusual, but instead of being disturbed by it, she was now speaking more animatedly with the young male. He in turn shrugged and said something clearly derogatory about Zayl. The necromancer turned his attention back to his meal and thoughts. In truth, he could not actually be certain that the World Stone had been destroyed, but the evidence was certainly there. Mount Ariat, where legend claimed it had been hidden, had exploded, its entire top ravaged. The destruction had been heard about even here in faraway Westmarch. More to the point, the rumors among those with the site gave stalker credits to the horrific claim. It was said that one of the primevals themselves, BEAU, Lord of Destruction, had been the cause, and if so, the mortal plane was in far worse to come. The World Stone had existed since time immemorial, created, so the teachings of Rathma said, to keep the mortal world protected. Now both the powers of light and darkness reached out to fully claim humanity, and in their battles against one another, the two cosmic factions threatened to destroy what they desired. Somehow all that tied into Zayel's own urge to come to Westmarch. Somewhere in this vast kingdom, the repercussions of BEAU's heinous deed would soon be felt. The only trouble was, he had no idea what to do next. Arriving in Westmarch was far as his sense of urgency had brought him. Now, Zayl felt adrift, confused. If you cannot find the way, wait. The way will find you. Rothma himself had supposedly said that, and from past experience, Zayl had found it to be all a true statement. Yet despite his extensive training, he was finally growing impatient. If the balance, and therefore all else, was in jeopardy, it behooved the way to find him, and quickly. He smelled before he saw the man suddenly standing beside his booth. The whiskered and capped figure looked as if he had been to sea much of his life, and from the scars and missing finger, a good part of that had probably been as a privateer. The mariner leaned over the table, obscuring Zayl's view of all else, and looked the Rathmanian up and down.
Friend of mine says that you be a necromancer.
He is correct. Zayl quickly returned, hoping that would end the conversation then and there. Alas, such was not to be true. Bending so near, his breath came at the spellcaster in smothering waves. The Westerner continued.
So these marks on your cloak.
He seized a portion near Zayl's shoulder, pulled it up between them. Seen close, the symbols almost danced.
They're all about death, aren't they?
They are about aspects of the mortality of life, that which follows after
Death.
among other things. The necromancer had no wish to draw more attention to himself, but he could see this conversation coming to no good end. What intention did the man have?
Get your grubby fingers out of my eye!
Bellowed a voice all too familiar to him. From somewhere behind Zayl there was a gasp and a curse. They were followed by a thud, and the same voice shouting,
Damn! Can't stop myself! Zayl! Zayl, love!
The man who had been speaking with the necromancer suddenly grabbed for Zayel's throat. Zayl moved faster. The heel of his left hand bared into the villain's jaw, throwing the latter back. At the same time, the necromancer muttered a few words under his breath. The scarred mariner looked around the room in absolute panic. He pointed at an empty corner and gibbered,
By the twinsies! What is this beast?
His gaze shifted left.
Another! Demons! There's demons everywhere!
Screaming, he shoved past his partner in crime, a stocky bearded figure holding a dagger in one hand. The second mariner's other hand was still half clenched. Zayl quickly glanced down at his waist. While he had been distracted by the first man, the companion had cut free the larger pouch without his sensing it. Of course, that had been the worst mistake they could have made. The second thief blatantly noticed Zayl rising. He started to lunge, but the spellcaster muttered another word. The blade went completely past Zayl. His attacker stumbled, then gasped. He began frantically waving both hands about.
My eyes! I can't see! My eyes!
The effect was a temporary one, just like the spell that had made the first brigand think that he was surrounded by demonic creatures. Zayl started to reach for the blinded villain.
Look out!
Called a female voice. He ducked back just in time to avoid the curved edge of a sword across the midsection. A wiry figure who was clearly in league with their pair grinned as he slashed again at Zayl. The necromancer reached to his waist and removed a small dagger. His adversary laughed, for although the spellcaster's dagger was a curious one, being serpentine of shape in the blade and carved with what appeared ivory, it hardly matched the length of the villain's sword. But when the cutthroat attempted to get past Zayel's guard, the dagger was there, meeting the longer blade and deflecting it with ease. Twice more the attacker lunged, only to be foiled. Zayl then pressed. He easily came under the other's guard, his dagger cutting the brigand in the arm and the chest. The necromancer's foe began to retreat, only to stumble over the purloined pouch.
Watch where you're stepping!
Complained a voice that seemed to come from within it. The would-be thief collided with the door in desperation. He flung his sword at Zayl, then leapt away. He seized the arm of his still blind comrade, then both men fled through the door. Zayl had no intention of giving chase. He thrust the dagger into his belt, then quickly retrieved the pouch. An epithet started to escape it, but a quick tap by the necromancer brought silence. Of the other patrons, most had fled at some point in the struggle. The few who remained seated eyed him for the most part with trepidation, loathing, and not a little fear. Zayl found it of interest that the woman and her bodyguard were standing as if having been prepared to give assistance. They were, in fact, the only ones who did not now treat him as a pariah. The Rathmanian recalled the warning cry and knew that it had been the noble woman who had given it. He bowed his head slightly in her direction, noting how she appraised him even now. Turning back to the booth, Zayl found Hiram anxiously coming over to him. The necromancer easily read the innkeeper's expression, for it was one that he had seen far too often. "I will be leaving," Zayl informed his host before Hiram could get up the nerve to ask him to do so. "I will not be needing a room, either." The proprietor could not hide his relief.
"'Tis not me, master, but the others. They don't understand."
Shrugging off Hiram's attempt at explanation, the black-clad figure retrieved his one glove from the table. Putting it back on, he tossed some coins to the innkeeper. "This will suffice, I think." The stout man eyed what lay in his palm.
"More than enough, master. I can't in good faith."
"Do not trouble yourself." Zayl was not wealthy, not at all, but as this had been his first stop in the capital, he wanted to leave with some semblance of respect from the locals, even after such chaos. A lost cause, surely, but he felt that he had to try. With the same silent stride with which he had entered, the necromancer headed out of the Black Ram. Zayl had no notion as where he would spend the night, but if necessary, he would do so out in the wild. He was used to doing so in the jungles of Kyrgyzstan, and so this would be no different, albeit cooler. His training had taught him to ignore most differences in temperature, and fortunately, the weather here was not that chill anyway. The myths had thickened since his entrance. Zayl focused, trying to see with more than simply his eyes.
"Damn brutes,"
grumbled a voice at his side.
"Be quiet, Humbart."
"You weren't the one rolling helplessly over the floor, and without so much as a single drink beforehand."
Zayl tapped the pouch.
"No. I had only a sword against which to contend."
"And you're welcome for my help there, lad. What would you do without me?"
The pale figure permitted himself a brief smile, but otherwise did not answer. Then he sensed another presence nearing. In a whisper, he commanded, "Silence."
"Are you just..."
But another tap by the necromancer on the pouch finally quieted his unseen companion. Reaching out with his heightened senses, Zayl located the newcomer behind him. With one gloved hand near the hilt of his dagger, he continued along as if unaware. Heavy thuds signaled the other's approaching steps. Stealth was clearly not a strong suit of the one following him. When he felt that his pursuer had gotten close enough, Zayl spun around. In the necromancer's hand, the pale blade stood ready. The shadowed form of a giant met his gaze. Something about it struck Zayl as familiar, and when he looked closer, he recognized the man. It was the bodyguard of the noblewoman who had given Zayl warning. The giant's hair was shorn close, stubble peppered across the dark skin of his face. He stood with the stance of a well-trained fighter, in that manner reminding the necromancer of Captain Kentrell Dumont, the mercenary whose path Zayl had crossed and whom he respected highly. The bodyguard was clad in dark blue ivory with crimson edging on his sleeves and pant legs. An emblem, a red circle surrounding a blue hawk's head, had been sewn on the uniform just where the heart was located. One of those unfortunate traditions that often gave enemies a perfect point upon which to target their weapons. The broad-rimmed boots seemed a bit garish to the Rathmanian, but he would have never been foolish enough to say so to such a mountain of a man.
I come at the behest of the mistress,
rumbled the bodyguard, showing both hands empty. He had an accent that marked him as coming from near to Luca Lane, on the western edge of the Twin Seas, and a place through which Zayl had passed on his way to the Western Kingdoms.
She would seek your counsel, Rathmanian, in a matter of the soul.
Would not a Zakarum priest be more appropriate than I? The giant grinned. And even in the misty dark, Zayl could see his white teeth, his many white teeth.
Zakarum, they would not appreciate the mistress's intent.
The fact that she had asked the necromancer to come to her made that clear enough. But Zayl was not ready to simply acquiesce. And what would she wish of one of mine?
She must speak with her husband. A matter of urgency.
And if the woman needed Zayl, it was because her husband was dead. An inheritance, no doubt. There were those who thought that the Rathmanians no better than the charlatans who read fortunes or gave seances at fairs or on the roads, paid performers, even if some of them had the gift. He started to turn away, but the bodyguard would not have it. The man reached for Zayl's arm, unaware of the danger of doing so.
She has nowhere else to turn. She said that something drew her in the inn, and when she saw you, she felt certain that you were the reason.
The necromancer hesitated. The last was likely a lie, but her suggestion that she had been drawn to the same location as him made Zayl think again of Rathma's words. Was the way being shown to him now? He balanced the pros and cons of agreeing and found the cons slightly stronger. Yet, when Zayl opened his mouth to speak, it was to answer. Very well. I will see her.
Thank you.
The bodyguard's tone hinted of tremendous relief, something that Zayl had not expected from a hired fighter from an employer. Most would have simply accepted the response. Zayl read in this man a deep loyalty. His large companion led the necromancer through the mist-enshrouded streets. Despite his agreement to see the noblewoman, Zayl remained cautious. This could still be a trap set by thieves or even the Zakarum. But if a trap, it appeared an elaborate one. Some blocks from the Black Ram, Zayl and his still unnamed companion confronted an elegant coach pulled by 4 muscular white horses. A dour driver, in the same livery as the bodyguard, nodded to the giant. Zayl noted that the house insignia was not at all obscure, in contrast to the age-long practice of aristocrats out on such ventures. The bodyguard moved ahead to open the door of the coach. As he did, someone within leaned toward the opening. Zayl faltered slightly. Her skin was a shade darker than his own, her full lips a deep, rich coloring that he knew was not the result of any enhancement. The hair cascaded down past her shoulders, ending below her shoulders. He had no doubt that her face and form attracted many a man, but she was clearly one who did not in any manner use her gifts for influence or gain. Certainly not with a foul necromancer especially. The noblewoman eyed Zayl closely, then glanced at her companion.
Thank you, both.
The giant bowed.
Mistress.
She extended a slim hand toward the Rathmanian.
Please, enter.
I would first know a name, my lady. A true name. Before she could answer, a male voice from within the coach snarled, "By the stars, Selene! I told you that this is going too far. Tell him nothing and let's be gone from this stinking area. I've known much better places to get drunk than that flea trap we were just in." Zayl recalled the man in the black ram that had assumed was her brother. So far, there seemed little similarity in their personalities. That he had already given away her first name while insisting she tell him nothing said much.
Hush, Sardak.
She returned quietly, smiling at Zayl as if aware of what he thought about her brash companion.
What he asks is fair, if he's to assist me.
You can't trust his kind. The Church of Zakarum says he's a desecrator of graves. A ghoul. Selene's smile hardened, and the gaze she turned on the unseen Sardak immediately silenced him. When she looked again at Zayl, it was with honest apology.
My brother is protective of me, Rathmanian, as I am of him, master.
I am just Zayl, my lady.
Nothing more? Well, just Zayl. I am the Lady Selene Nesardo, and if that is enough introduction, I prefer that we leave here now.
She retreated into the coach, her invitation for him to sit beside her obvious. Zayl's brow arched. Few women there were who would have willingly have offered that. Even for the summoning of a rich husband's spirit, he had expected her to insist he sit next to the charming Sardak. A muffled snort escaped the pouch. Pulf frowned, but when the noise did not repeat itself, he relaxed again. Still holding the door, he said,
Master Zayl?
Bowing his head slightly to the bodyguard, Zayl slipped up into the coach with the quiet ease of a shadow. His vision more attuned to the night than that of most people, Zayl saw the sour expression on the brother's face. However, despite Sardak's threatening attitude, Zayl calculated that the man was little danger to him. Drink was Sardak's only weapon, which he used against himself. In that brief moment during which her brother had captured the necromancer's attention, Lady Selene Nesardo had fully recovered her wits. She glanced at the large pouch.
The coach is small. I can have Pulse put that in the storage box in the back if you'd like. You might be more comfortable than in.
Quickly sliding a hand atop the bag, Zayl replied, It stays with me. She had obviously seen the movement of his hand, but said nothing of it.
Yes, I saw her lose these not lessons of their dismay.
Lady Nesardo said no more about the pouch, not even inviting any curiosity as to what it held. That despite having no doubt heard the voice in the end, she would find out soon enough the truth if Zayl agreed to what she requested. Sardak remained grimly silent throughout the ride, staring at the necromancer as if Zayl had grown fangs and the pair of horns. Zayl had expected his hostess to begin explaining her needs, but when she spoke it was only to ask him such mundane questions like how his journey across the Twin Seas had gone and what Luco Lane was like. Selene did not ask why he had traveled so far, though. The noblewoman did her utmost to treat him with a respect due to another of her station, as one who was generally looked upon with disdain, distrust, or fear, all feelings embodied in her brother at the moment. Zayl found it refreshing. Then, without warning, a black wave washed over him, overwhelming his senses. It was too much even for his training. A gasp escaped Zayel's lips, and the cloaked figure suddenly sprawled against the back of the seat. The interior of the coach vanished. The necromancer was caught in the bottomless black vortex. He felt bony fingers clawing at his flesh and heard the wailing of thousands of lost souls. The fingers tore relentlessly at him, resurrecting another horrible time that made the Rothmanian's gloved right hand clenched tight. Suddenly Zayl became trapped in a sticky substance that he could not see. It was everywhere, and even his slightest struggles entangled him further. The wailing grew more strident. He heard the sounds of battle and the cries of death. Magical forces sprung into play around him. Then something else occurred. It reached out from death beyond, from a place far worse. Even though it was so very distant, he could sense its awful malevolence. But at that very moment, another presence entered its struggling place. Who or what it was, Zayl could not say, only that it sought to drag him forth from what assailed him. He seized the lifeline it offered, and finally managed to focus his will. The necromancer's mind tore free of the stickiness trapping it. The clawing hands and the mournful voices receded, and with them foiled, the dark presence sank back into the foul place from which it had emerged, and the mortal world began to come into focus. The first thing that Zayl saw was Lady Selene Nesardo's shadowed face looming over him. Her expression was filled only with concern. She had one cool hand against his temple. He realized that then she had been the source of his lifeline. The noblewoman had some gift of magic herself.
Are you that, sir?
She muttered, her other hand thrust toward her brother.
Give me your flask.
Selene?
The flask.
A moment later, she brought a small silver drinking flask to Zayel's lips. The disciplines of the Rothmanians did not preclude drink, but still the liquid that slipped down Zayel's throat burned like fire. The necromancer coughed violently. Through his struggles, he heard Sardak chuckle. Can handle the dead, but can't handle his liquor. Selene glared at him.
Considering what you pour into your system, be thankful that I'm not having to ask him to summon your spirit.
At least my spirit would be full of spirits. Zayl ignored their argument, clearly an ongoing one of no relevance to the stunning attack on him. He shifted back to the proper sitting position, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. Calm, he might have seemed, but inside the necromancer was still feeling the effects of the earlier strain. It had taken him completely by surprise, catching him with most of his defenses down. From where it had originated, he sensed nothing upon his arrival in Westmarch, nothing even at the Black Ram. How could such a powerful force be localized? Is there not? The coach came to an abrupt halt. Lady Nesardo quickly glanced out the window.
Right here.
The noblewoman declared, utterly ignoring Zayel's question. Home, sweet home, added Sardak with some mockery. Polth appeared at his mistress's door. He swung it open, then gave the Lady Nesardo a hand down. Sardak, moving with astonishing grace for one of his inebriated condition, slipped out right after her without so much as a glance back at the necromancer. From without the coach, Selene commanded.
Help our friend, Paul.
Without batting an eye, the bodyguard held out his huge hand to the Rothmanian.
Master Zayl?
Thank you, but I am recovered enough. Keeping his pouch near his side, he stepped out. While he had been recouping his strength, the coach had apparently not only arrived at the gates of its destination, but had entered them. A huge brick wall with spikes atop surrounded a wide manicured lawn. Zayl saw that the vehicle had driven up a stone path that wound from the iron gates to the front steps. "Welcome to our humble abode," jested Selene's brother, stretching his arm toward the house. Zayl looked up, and farther up yet. In the midst of so many tall arched buildings with jutting towers and gargoyles atop the battlements, the house of Nesardo stood unique. It loomed higher than any of its neighbors, but where their towers ended in tiled, weathered points, it did so with a pale, moon-like roundness that seemed so pristine, even in the dark of night, that Zayl first thought it a new addition. But a cursory study of the structure as a whole immediately put that notion to rest. There were no breaks between the sections, as was always evident even with the most intricate reconstruction. This was the house as it had been originally designed. Zayl gaze moved on from the peculiar rounded roof. The sleek walls of the tower descended to a more typical rectangular design, which stretched out nearly twice as wide as the largest demicule. The roof of the main section arched so sharply and narrowly that it gave Selene's residence the feel of a cathedral or church, a complete contrast to the top of the tower. There were 8 windows on each level, and each of those windows was shaped like an octagon. 8 fluted columns also stood guard at the entrance, which consisted of a pair of massive iron doors, each with 8 bracketed frames decorating the front. To reach the doors, visitors would first have to ascend an equal number of lengthy marble stairs wide enough to hold several dozen people at once. At most any other time, such an obsession with a particular number would have struck Zayl with much interest, for the teachings of Rathma included understanding the influences of all numbers on the balance. There were numbers who could tilt it one way or another with ease, if manipulated by the knowing soul. But for the moment Zayl did not pay that any mind, for he was struck instead by something more immediate, something most unsettling. The building before him housed not only the Nesardo family, but also the source of which had nearly taken him on the coach.